Mr. Bashir, how many times did you meet with Christian Firth of GC Strategies?
Thank you for the question. Just to clarify, are you referring to my current job at KPMG or previously in the federal government, or both?
Ever.
Ever. Okay. Thanks for clarifying. I'll separate the answer into two different answers. So in the federal government, I did meet with Mr. Firth 2 to 3 times at most. Generally to discuss, like I met with several vendors to discuss some offerings that he had in the security space. I met with him once virtually while at KPMG.
In your, excuse me, in your meetings with him, can you say where they happened? Did they happen in your office, in an office tower here in the NCR, or did they happen at a private residence, at a restaurant? Where were they?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the KPMG meeting, as I mentioned, the one was virtual. The 2 to 3 at most, when I was at the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, all occurred in the lobby of 90 Elgin, which is the Treasury Board government building.
And so these meetings were just one-on-ones?
That's correct.
Including your meeting, the virtual meeting, when you worked at KPMG, it was just you and Mr. Firth?
That is correct, yeah.
And could you quickly give a breakdown of what the topics were that were discussed in your meeting while you were a public servant, and likewise when you worked at KPMG?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I should say all my answers subsequently will be directed to the chair. Sorry about that. So while in the federal public service, Christian Firth, like I said, many vendors reach out from time to time to explain what type of security products or services they may be offering. Given my role at the time was a Director General of Cybersecurity. In the specific meetings with Mr. Firth, I remember discussing 2 products related to, and you have to refresh. I'm sorry, I apologize for the lack of detail, but I remember something around secure communications and digital identity. But no subsequent meetings afterwards. He kind of left with a brochure, a pamphlet, so to speak, and that was the end of that. And the KPMG meeting specifically was more of essentially a reintroduction, I suppose. He had apparently been talking to one of my colleagues prior. I was looped into an email thread. It was apparent that the subject of cybersecurity came up, and then I subsequently discussed with Mr. Firth the types of cybersecurity services that KPMG.
Colleague?
Sorry?
Who was the colleague that you referenced?
It's a retired partner who's no longer with the firm.
Okay. And did Antonio Utano, who's a senior official at the Canada Border Service Agency, direct KPMG to work with Christian Firth and GC Strategies?
Thank you for the question. So upon submitting, after we submitted a proposal to Mr. Utano, and I did have a meeting, and it was at that meeting he did say, can you also submit this proposal through to GC Strategies? My understanding was that Mr. Utano was exploring his procurement options. I believe his procurement team had likely given him some advice on what was the quickest way to procure. I understand there was some urgency due to the cybersecurity nature of the work in question.
Well, I'm sure it did make the procurement process easier because it skips the procurement process. Did it have anything to do with ease of contracting and cash flow? Was that one of the reasons?
Thank you for the question. I think hard to speculate. It's probably a question better directed for the CBSA, to be honest.
What did Mr. Otano tell you about GC Strategies? Had you worked with Antonio Otano prior to this ArriveCan engagement?
Thanks for the question. I'd never worked with Mr. Utano prior to the engagement. I likely crossed paths with him in my time in government, at a government event, but I don't recall ever working with him on anything. And sorry, to answer the first part of your question, the way it came up was we discussed the proposal. He seemed happy with what he saw and suggested that I pass that along to Mr. Firth afterwards.
Did this seem normal to you that you'd be directed to submit a proposal to a subcontractor when you were submitting a proposal directly to the federal government? Is that the normal way that you do business?
Thanks for the question. The way I looked at it at the time was, and the way I characterized procurement is there's just essentially 3 steps to it. Like step 1 is to identify what it is you want to procure. Second step, identify the vehicle by which you would procure it. And third is to procure it. And having first completed that first step of establishing what it is that he wanted to procure, my understanding was that Mr. Utano was simply exploring the options that he had. And one of the other options he had was that SEPS vehicle that my colleague Lydia discussed last time. And as my other colleague Hartaj mentioned, we would have happily competed for it had he wanted to put it out to a full tender as well.
Right. So, as someone who previously worked for the public service and as a taxpayer, did do you find it strange that the government of Canada asked a company the size of KPMG, 11,000 employees, I think you said in your opening, to subcontract through two guys who are obviously taking a percentage of the total contract amount? So KPMG says, well, this is how much it's going to cost us to do it. And we know that they were adding up to 30% on top of that. Does that seem like would you advise clients to follow that method? Or would you advise them to procure the services directly from the vendor?
Thank you for the question. Obviously, we'd prefer, direct procurement where possible, for sure. I can't begin to speculate on the reasons CBSA may have wanted to go that particular route.
Any other instances where this type of direction was given to KPMG or another company to, instead of offering their services directly to the government, to CBSA, to work through GC Strategies or another third party?
Thank you for the question. To my knowledge, no, but I do know KPMG as a firm, and I believe we submitted this in writing as well, has subcontracted for, and don't quote me on this, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it was 13 different companies of varying sizes, from very large organizations to small. I think the key there is where we can help provide expertise, specifically to the government in areas that we are good at and could provide value for taxpayers. I think we would entertain that, yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Just a word of, I think it's obvious, you are being quoted here. If you discover after the fact that information is a little off, do let us go, because this is a Parliament House Commons committee. So I appreciate your turn of phrase. Don't quote me on it, but you are being quoted for the official record here. So, but I take it. I take that and take that in the spirit it was given in your comment as well.